Sarah Martinez, 42, thought her job was safe until her boss suddenly stopped looking her in the eye. For months, he gave her special treatment. No criticism, no questions. She thought he was planning to fire her, but the truth was far worse. Her teenage twins had a secret. They photographed her drinking on the job and were blackmailing her boss for cash. Emails, photos, threats. They demanded $500 a week, or the pictures would go public. Even to Sarah's sister, a loan officer whose career could crumble. Luxury shoes, cash, tech gadgets, bought with blackmail money, hidden behind bedroom doors, and their mother had no idea. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Dr. Emily Watson adjusted her reading glasses and looked across her desk at Sarah Martinez, a well-dressed woman in her early 40s who sat rigidly in the leather chair, her manicured hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Sarah's appearance spoke of professional success, tailored blazer, expensive jewelry, perfectly styled hair, but her eyes told a different story. They darted nervously around the room, never quite meeting Dr. Watson's gaze for more than a few seconds. "Sarah," Dr. Watson began gently, "you mentioned on the phone that you're experiencing some workplace stress. Can you tell me more about what's been happening?" Sarah's laugh was hollow, brittle. "Workplace stress. Yes, that's one way to put it." She paused, seeming to gather herself. "Dr. Watson, I think I'm losing my mind. My boss is acting so strangely that I'm convinced he's planning to fire me, and I've been drinking more than I should to cope with the anxiety." Dr. Watson made a note. "When you say your boss is acting strangely, can you be more specific?" "His name is David Thorne. He's the VP of marketing at our firm, and I've worked under him for 6 years. David has always been demanding, detail-oriented, quick to point out mistakes. It's made me a better marketer, honestly. But 3 months ago, everything changed." Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "He started approving every request I made without question. Project proposals that should have required extensive revisions were getting green lights immediately. He began giving me easier assignments, things that were honestly beneath my skill level. And Dr. Watson, he won't look at me. We used to have these intense strategy meetings where he'd drill down into every detail, challenge every assumption. Now he barely makes eye contact." "That must be very confusing for you," Dr. Watson observed. "How has this affected your work performance?" Sarah's face flushed slightly. "That's the thing, I've been making mistakes. Stupid ones. Budget miscalculations, missed deadlines, presentations with obvious errors. In the old days, David would have called me into his office and given me a very direct conversation about standards. Now, nothing. He just accepts it. Covers for me. It's like he's protecting me from something, and I can't figure out what." "And that's when you started drinking more?" The question hit its mark. Sarah's composure cracked slightly. "I've always enjoyed wine with dinner. Maybe a cocktail at company events. But the stress of not knowing if I'm about to be fired, of feeling like I'm walking on eggshells every day, yes, I started having a glass of wine at lunch. Just to take the edge off. And when I get home, sometimes I need a couple of drinks to unwind." Dr. Watson nodded without judgment. "It sounds like you've been carrying a tremendous amount of uncertainty and anxiety. That's exhausting." "It is," Sarah agreed, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "And the worst part is, I can't talk to anyone about it. My ex-husband would just say I'm being paranoid. It's one of the reasons we divorced. My sister Rachel would worry herself sick. And my twins. God, they're 17. They don't need to know their mother is falling apart." "Tell me about Jessica and Michael," Dr. Watson prompted. Sarah's expression softened for the first time since she entered the office. "They're incredible kids. Honor roll students, involved in student government and debate team. Jessica wants to study pre-law at Northwestern, and Michael is interested in computer science. They're so mature for their age, so responsible. Sometimes I think they're more together than I am. It sounds like you're very proud of them. I am. After the divorce 2 years ago, it's been just the three of us. I've tried so hard to give them stability, to make sure they don't suffer because their father and I couldn't make it work. They've been so understanding, so supportive. Sometimes I feel like I don't deserve them. Dr. Watson made another note. Sarah, you mentioned that you think your boss might be planning to fire you. Have there been any concrete indicators of that, or is it more of a feeling based on his changed behavior? That's just it, there haven't been any concrete signs. No HR meetings, no performance improvement plans, no budget discussions about downsizing. But Dr. Watson, in my experience, when a boss suddenly starts treating you with kid gloves, it usually means one of two things: either they're grooming you for a promotion, or they're building a case to let you go gently. Given that I've been making mistakes and he's not addressing them, I'm convinced it's the latter. Have you considered simply asking him directly? Sarah shook her head. I've tried to bring up my performance in our one-on-ones, but he deflects. Says everything is fine, that he appreciates my work, that I shouldn't worry. But his body language tells a different story. He's nervous around me, almost guilty. It's like he knows something I don't. And the drinking helps with these feelings of uncertainty? Sarah hesitated before answering. It quiets the noise in my head. The constant wondering, the analysis of every interaction, the fear of financial instability. When I have a drink, I can pretend everything is normal for a little while. Dr. Watson leaned forward slightly. Sarah, how much would you say you're drinking on an average day? A glass of wine at lunch, maybe 2. And then at home. Sarah trailed off, doing mental calculations. Maybe 3 or 4 drinks in the evening. But Dr. Watson, it's not like I'm drunk all the time. I function fine. I get the kids to school, I complete my work assignments, I maintain the household. No one would ever know. No one knows about the lunch drinks? Well, I'm careful. I go to different restaurants, I use breath mints, I'm not sloppy about it. And at home, the kids are usually in their rooms doing homework or on video calls with friends. They're very self-sufficient. Dr. Watson made more notes, her expression thoughtful. Sarah, I'm wondering if there might be other explanations for your boss's behavior that you haven't considered. Sometimes when we're anxious, we can interpret neutral situations as threatening. Maybe, Sarah admitted. But Dr. Watson, I've been in marketing for 15 years. I know how office politics work, how people behave when they're about to make difficult decisions. David's behavior fits a pattern. What would you like to see happen, ideally? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. I want to know where I stand. I want the uncertainty to end. If David is planning to fire me, I wish he'd just do it so I can start looking for other opportunities. If he's not, I want to understand why everything has changed. And I want to stop relying on alcohol to get through the day. Those are very reasonable goals, Dr. Watson said. I think we can work together to help you find some clarity in this situation. In the meantime, I'd like you to consider keeping a journal of your interactions with David, noting specific behaviors and your reactions to them. Sometimes patterns become clearer when we write them down. I can do that, Sarah agreed. And regarding the alcohol use, would you be willing to try some alternative coping strategies when you feel that urge to drink? Sarah nodded, though her expression suggested some skepticism. I'm willing to try. Though I have to admit, nothing else seems to work as well as wine for shutting off the anxiety. We'll explore some techniques that might be more effective in the long run, Dr. Watson assured her. For now, I want you to know that seeking help takes courage, Sarah. Many people in your situation would just continue suffering in silence. As Sarah gathered her purse to leave, Dr. Watson added, and Sarah? Whatever is going on with your boss, whatever the explanation turns out to be, you deserve to know the truth. Don't let uncertainty paralyze you forever. 1 week later, Sarah sat in her home office on a Saturday morning, nursing her second cup of coffee and trying to concentrate on quarterly budget projections. The twins were still asleep, teenagers and their weekend sleep schedules, and the house was blissfully quiet. She'd managed to get through the previous week without any lunchtime drinks, though the evenings had been more challenging. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Mom, can you help me with my college essay? My laptop is acting weird." Sarah walked upstairs to Jessica's room, finding her daughter sitting on her bed with a frustrated expression, her long dark hair pulled back in a messy bun. "What's wrong with it?" Sarah asked, settling down beside Jessica. "It keeps freezing when I try to open Word. I have this scholarship essay due Monday, and I can't afford to lose the work." Sarah took the laptop, a relatively new MacBook Pro that she'd bought Jessica for her birthday. "Let me take a look. Sometimes these applications just need to be restarted." As Sarah opened the laptop, she noticed several browser windows were still open. One appeared to be Gmail, and as she moved to close it, her eye caught something that made her blood run cold. In the draft folder was an email addressed to david.thorne@stratton-marketing.com. Her hands trembling slightly, Sarah clicked on the draft before she could stop herself. What she read made her stomach drop to the floor. "Mr. Thorne, this is your final warning. Mom still doesn't know we have pictures of her drinking during work hours. $500 by Friday, or we send everything to HR and to Aunt Rachel at First National Bank. We know how much her reputation means to her career. Don't make us expose what a drunk her sister really is. J&M." Sarah stared at the screen, reading the words over and over, hoping they would somehow change or disappear. But they remained, stark and damning, revealing a reality so horrific she could barely process it. Her 17-year-old twins were blackmailing her boss. "Mom?" Jessica's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Is everything okay? You look really pale." Sarah turned to look at her daughter, really look at her. Jessica's expression showed concern, but underneath that, Sarah could now see something else. A wariness. A calculation that shouldn't exist in the eyes of a teenager. "Jessica," Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "What is this email?" The concern vanished from Jessica's face, replaced by something much colder. "Mom, I can explain." "Explain what?" "Explain how you've been blackmailing my boss. Explain how you've been taking pictures of me drinking. Explain how you've been threatening to destroy my career and your aunt's reputation." Jessica stood up, her posture defensive. "You don't understand. We were protecting you." "Protecting me?" Sarah's voice was rising now. "By extorting my boss? By taking surveillance photos of your own mother?" "Michael." Jessica called out, her voice sharp. "Michael, get in here now." Footsteps thundered down the hallway, and Michael appeared in the doorway, his hair disheveled from sleep but his eyes instantly alert as he took in the scene. "She found the email," Jessica said simply. Michael's expression hardened. "Mom, before you freak out, you need to understand what we saw." "What you saw?" Sarah felt like she was in a nightmare. "What you saw was your mother having a drink at lunch. That doesn't give you the right to." "It wasn't just a drink," Michael interrupted. "Mom, we followed you. Multiple times. You were having 3, sometimes 4 glasses of wine at lunch. You were stumbling when you walked back to your office. You were drunk at work." Sarah felt the accusation like a physical blow. "I was not drunk. I was managing my stress. By drinking," Jessica said flatly. "During work hours. Which is grounds for immediate termination, which would have left us without health insurance, without college funding, without any financial stability. So you decided to blackmail my boss instead?" "We decided to create a situation where he couldn't fire you," Michael said, his tone matter of fact. "Mr. Thorne is a good guy, Mom. He was clearly struggling with what to do about your drinking. He didn't want to destroy your career, but he couldn't ignore it either. So we gave him a reason to keep protecting you. Sarah stared at her son, seeing a stranger. How? How did you even get pictures? Jessica and Michael exchanged a look. The coffee shop across from your office building has a perfect view of the 23rd floor, Jessica explained. Michael brought his camera with the telephoto lens. We documented you drinking during lunch hours for 2 weeks before we made contact with Mr. Thorne. Made contact, Sarah repeated numbly. You mean started blackmailing him? We prefer to think of it as creating mutually beneficial circumstances, Michael said with a slight smile that chilled Sarah to the bone. Sarah looked around Jessica's room, really seeing it for the first time in months. The expensive clothes hanging in the closet. The new iPad on the desk. The designer purse sitting on the dresser. How long? She asked quietly. 3 months, Jessica admitted. We've been careful not to ask for too much at once. Just enough to supplement our allowances, help with college prep expenses, things like that. $500 is not an allowance supplement, Jessica. That's serious money. Which is why this is the last payment, Michael said. We're not greedy, Mom. We just needed to ensure job security for you until we graduate and go to college. Sarah felt bile rising in her throat. You've been planning this? The timeline, the amounts, the threats to Rachel? We had to think strategically, Jessica said, sounding for all the world like she was discussing a school project. Threatening just your job wouldn't have been enough. Mr. Thorne seems to genuinely care about you. But threatening Aunt Rachel's reputation at the bank? That gave him a compelling reason to cooperate. Because you knew I would never forgive myself if Rachel's career was destroyed because of my problems, Sarah said, understanding flooding through her. Exactly, Michael nodded approvingly. You always put family first, Mom. We counted on that. Sarah sat down heavily on Jessica's bed, her legs no longer able to support her. Who are you? She whispered. What happened to my children? We grew up, Jessica said simply. We learned to solve problems instead of just complaining about them. You learned to be criminals. We learned to protect our family, Michael corrected. Mom, you've been falling apart since the divorce. The drinking, the anxiety, the paranoia about work. We couldn't just sit back and watch you self-destruct. So instead you decided to destroy an innocent man's life? Mr. Thorne is fine, Jessica said dismissively. He makes 6 figures. He can afford a few $100s a month to keep his department running smoothly. Sarah looked at her daughter, her beautiful, brilliant daughter who had apparently become a sociopath, and felt something break inside her chest. Get out, she said quietly. Mom, Michael started. Get out of this room. Both of you. Now. The twins exchanged another look, this one less confident. We can fix this, Jessica said. We can make it right. How? Sarah's voice was raw. How do you make blackmail right? How do you undo months of terrorizing an innocent man? How do you give me back my children, who I apparently never really knew? Neither twin had an answer for that. After they left, Sarah sat alone in Jessica's room, staring at the email on the laptop screen. Her perfect children, her honor roll students, her debate team champions, were blackmailers. They had photographed her during her lowest moments and used those images to extort money from her boss. And the most horrifying part was how logical they made it sound. Sarah didn't move from Jessica's room for 2 hours. She read through the email chain, discovering that the twins had initiated contact with David 6 weeks after Sarah had first noticed his changed behavior. Their initial email had been polite but chilling. Mr. Thorne. We are writing to inform you that we have documented evidence of our mother Sarah Martinez drinking alcohol during work hours. We understand this puts you in a difficult position, as she is otherwise a valued employee. We are prepared to keep this information confidential in exchange for your cooperation in ensuring our mother's job security. We believe this arrangement benefits everyone involved. Please respond if you are interested in discussing terms. Respectfully, J&M. David's response had been immediate and desperate. Who is this? How did you get these photos? What do you want? The twins had been patient, professional, terrifyingly mature in their extortion. They had outlined their terms clearly, $300 initially, then $200 monthly, with the understanding that David would protect Sarah's position and never mention her drinking problem to anyone. David had tried to negotiate, had pleaded with them to reconsider, had even offered to pay for Sarah's treatment instead. But the twins had been inflexible. They wanted money, and they wanted guarantees about Sarah's job security. The most recent exchange, from just 3 days ago, showed David's growing desperation. I can't keep doing this. Your mother is a good person who needs help, not protection from consequences. This has to stop. The twins' response had been swift and brutal. Mr. Thorne, we understand your frustration, but the arrangement continues until we say it stops. Any attempt to involve authorities or to fire our mother will result in immediate release of all photographic evidence to HR, the company board, and our aunt at First National Bank. Sarah's drinking problem would become very public very quickly. Sarah closed the laptop and walked downstairs, where she found Jessica and Michael sitting at the kitchen table, whispering urgently to each other. They looked up when she entered, their expressions a mixture of defiance and apprehension. Sit down, Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt. We're going to talk about this properly. The twins remained standing. I said sit down. Something in Sarah's tone must have penetrated their teenage confidence, because they both sat. Sarah pulled out her phone and placed it on the table. I'm going to call David Thorne right now and tell him that the blackmail stops immediately. Mom, don't Jessica started. Then I'm going to call the police and report what you've done. You can't, Michael said quickly. If you report us, everything comes out. Your drinking, the photos, Aunt Rachel's reputation. You'll lose your job anyway. Maybe, Sarah agreed. But at least I'll have my integrity back. And more importantly, I'll be doing the right thing. The right thing? Jessica's voice was incredulous. Mom, the right thing was getting help for your drinking problem months ago. The right thing was not putting our entire family's financial stability at risk because you couldn't cope with stress. We did what we had to do. Sarah looked at her daughter and realized that Jessica truly believed what she was saying. In her mind, she had been the responsible adult, cleaning up her mother's mess. Jessica, what you did was a felony. Multiple felonies. Extortion, blackmail, harassment. You could go to prison. Only if someone presses charges, Michael pointed out. And Mr. Thorne isn't going to do that, because then he'd have to explain why he kept an alcoholic employee for months without reporting it to HR. The casual way Michael discussed the legal implications of their crimes made Sarah feel sick. You've thought of everything, haven't you? We've tried to, Jessica admitted. Mom, we love you. Everything we did was to protect you and our family. But we're not going to apologize for being smart enough to solve a problem you couldn't handle. Sarah stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the suburban street where she'd raised her children, where she'd thought she was giving them a safe, normal childhood. When did you become these people? She asked without turning around. What people? Michael asked. People who think blackmail is an acceptable solution to problems. People who photograph their own mother's worst moments and use them as weapons. People who threaten innocent men and destroy their peace of mind for months. We became people who take action instead of just complaining, Jessica said. We became people who protect our family. Sarah turned back to face them. David Thorne has a family too. Did you think about that? Did you consider that your solution was causing immense stress to a man who was only trying to do his job? The twins exchanged another look, this one less certain. He's fine, Michael said, but his voice lacked conviction. Is he? You've been terrorizing him for 3 months. You've put him in an impossible position where he had to choose between his professional ethics and your threats. You've made him complicit in covering up what he perceived as a serious workplace issue. Do you have any idea what that kind of stress does to a person? For the first time since the conversation began, Jessica looked uncomfortable. We thought he'd be okay with it. He makes a lot of money. Money doesn't protect you from psychological damage, Jessica. David has probably been losing sleep, questioning his judgment, wondering if he's doing the right thing. You've made him feel like a criminal for trying to protect me. We were protecting you too, Michael protested. No, Sarah said firmly. You were protecting yourselves. You were protecting your college funds and your comfortable lifestyle and your plans for the future. I was just collateral damage. The twins sat in silence, and for a moment, Sarah thought she saw cracks in their facade. But then Jessica lifted her chin defiantly. Even if that's true, what's done is done. Calling the police now won't change anything except to make everything worse for everyone. Sarah picked up her phone. We're about to find out. Mom, wait, Michael said urgently. Before you do something we'll all regret, let us propose an alternative. Despite herself, Sarah hesitated. What alternative? We stop the blackmail immediately. We delete all the photos. We write Mr. Thorne an apology letter explaining that it was a misguided attempt to help you, and we never contact him again. In exchange for what? You get help for your drinking problem, Jessica said. Real help. Therapy, possibly treatment, whatever it takes. And you let us graduate and go to college without criminal records that would destroy our futures. Sarah stared at her children, seeing the calculation in their eyes even as they tried to appear contrite. You're still trying to manipulate me, she said quietly. We're trying to find a solution that works for everyone, Michael corrected. The solution that works for everyone is the truth, Sarah said. David deserves to know who's been tormenting him. The police deserve to know that crimes have been committed. And you too deserve to face the consequences of your actions. She started to dial David's number, but Jessica's voice stopped her. If you do this, Mom, we'll never forgive you. Sarah looked up at her daughter, seeing not the sweet little girl who used to crawl into bed with her during thunderstorms, but a young woman who had learned to weaponize love and family loyalty. If I don't do this, Jessica, I'll never forgive myself. Sarah's hands shook as she dialed David's personal cell phone number. She'd only used it a few times over the years, once when she'd been stuck in traffic and late for an important client meeting, another time when a family emergency had required her to leave work suddenly. Now she was about to use it for the most difficult conversation of her professional life. The phone rang 3 times before David answered, his voice cautious. Sarah? Is everything okay? It's Saturday afternoon. David, Sarah's voice cracked. She took a deep breath and tried again. David, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen to the whole story before you respond. There was a pause. Okay. I'm listening. Sarah looked at Jessica and Michael, who were watching her with expressions of barely controlled panic. David, my children have been blackmailing you for 3 months. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Sarah wondered if the call had dropped. David? Are you there? I'm here. His voice was barely a whisper. Sarah, what are you saying? I found emails on my daughter's laptop. J&M, Jessica and Michael Martinez. They've been taking photographs of me drinking during lunch and using them to extort money from you. Another long pause. When David spoke again, his voice was stronger, tinged with something that might have been relief. You didn't know. I had no idea. David, I am so sorry. I can't begin to express how horrified I am by what they've done to you. Sarah heard David let out a shaky breath. Sarah, do you have any idea what the last 3 months have been like for me? I've been walking around feeling like I was losing my mind. I knew you had been drinking at lunch, I could smell it sometimes when you came back to the office, and your afternoon performance had become inconsistent. But I also knew you were going through a difficult divorce, and you're such a valuable employee that I was trying to figure out how to address it sensitively. I know. I can imagine how impossible this has been for you. Then I got that first email with the photos. Clear, undeniable evidence of you drinking during work hours. But the people sending them weren't asking me to fire you, they were asking me to protect you while they extorted money from me. It was the most surreal situation I've ever encountered. Sarah could hear the strain in David's voice, the exhaustion of months of impossible stress. David, how much money have they taken from you? About $2,000 so far. But Sarah, it wasn't about the money. It was about the position they put me in. I couldn't fire you because they threatened to go public with information that would destroy not just your career, but your sister's reputation. I couldn't ignore your drinking problem because that would make me complicit. I couldn't report the blackmail because then everything would come out anyway. So you tried to protect me while managing your own victimization, Sarah said, understanding flooding through her. David, that must have been torture. I started seeing a therapist, David admitted. I wasn't sleeping, I was snapping at my wife and kids, I was questioning every decision I made at work. I began to wonder if I was having some kind of breakdown. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. I am so sorry. David, you have to know that I never wanted any of this. If I had known what they were doing. What would you have done? Exactly what I'm doing now. Calling you to apologize and to tell you that it stops immediately. And your children? What happens to them? Sarah looked at Jessica and Michael, who were listening to her side of the conversation with growing alarm. That's up to you, David. They committed serious crimes against you. If you want to press charges, I'll support that decision completely. Mom, no. Jessica whispered urgently. Sarah held up a hand to silence her. David, whatever you decide, you need to know that I take full responsibility for creating the situation that allowed this to happen. My drinking problem put you in an impossible position, and my children exploited that. I should have gotten help months ago. Sarah, David's voice was gentle now. Your drinking problem didn't create blackmailers. Your children made a choice to commit crimes. Those are separate issues. Are they? If I hadn't been drinking at lunch, if I hadn't been struggling so obviously, they wouldn't have had ammunition to use against you. Maybe not this ammunition, but Sarah, what your children did requires a level of planning and manipulation that goes far beyond normal teenage behavior. This isn't something that happened because they saw you have a drink at lunch. This is something they did because they're capable of this kind of calculation. Sarah looked at her twins again, really seeing them. The expensive clothes, the latest technology, the casual way they discussed felonies. You're right. I think I've been blind to who they really are. What do you want to do now? David asked. I want to make this right, as much as that's possible. I want to get help for my drinking. I want you to have the choice about whether to involve law enforcement. And I want my children to understand that there are consequences for their actions. Okay, David said. Here's what I think we should do. Let's meet tomorrow, Sunday, at the office when no one else is around. Bring Jessica and Michael. I want to look them in the eye and understand how two teenagers thought blackmail was an acceptable solution to their family's problems. David, are you sure? You don't owe us anything. You've been victimized enough. I need closure, Sarah. I need to understand this situation fully before I decide how to move forward. After Sarah hung up, she turned to face her children, who were staring at her with expressions of disbelief and fury. You just destroyed our lives, Jessica said flatly. No, Sarah replied. You destroyed your own lives the moment you decided to blackmail an innocent man. I'm just trying to salvage what's left of our family's integrity. Integrity? Michael laughed bitterly. Mom, you've been drunk at work for months. Where was your integrity then? You're right, Sarah said, the admission seeming to surprise all three of them. I made serious mistakes. I should have gotten help instead of trying to manage my problems with alcohol. But my mistakes don't justify your crimes. So what happens tomorrow? Jessica asked. Tomorrow you're going to look David Thorne in the eye and explain to him why you thought it was acceptable to terrorize him for 3 months. You're going to apologize, genuinely apologize, for what you've put him through. And then you're going to accept whatever consequences he decides are appropriate. And if he decides to press charges? Michael asked. Sarah met her son's eyes steadily. Then you'll learn that actions have consequences, and that being smart isn't the same as being wise. Sunday afternoon, Sarah sat in the parking lot of Stratton Marketing's office building, watching her twins fidget in the back seat. Jessica was staring out the window with studied indifference, but Sarah could see the tension in her rigid posture. Michael was picking at his fingernails, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood that Sarah hadn't seen in years. Before we go in, Sarah said, I want to be clear about something. You are not victims here. You are not misunderstood teenagers who made a mistake. You planned and executed a campaign of extortion against a man who was trying to help me. Whatever happens in that conference room, you will accept responsibility without excuses or deflection. What if he's recording us? Jessica asked. What if he's trying to get us to confess on tape? Sarah turned to look at her daughter. Then you'll tell the truth. Jessica, you seem to think that being clever enough to avoid consequences is the same as being right. It's not. David was waiting for them in the lobby, looking haggard despite his weekend casual clothes. Sarah had never noticed before how much weight he'd lost, how dark the circles under his eyes had become. The evidence of the stress her children had caused him was written all over his face. Thank you for coming, David said formally, shaking Sarah's hand and nodding to the twins. Let's go up to conference room B. The elevator ride was silent and tense. Jessica and Michael flanked Sarah like reluctant bodyguards, their usual teenage confidence replaced by something that might have been actual nervousness. In the conference room, David sat across from the three of them, his hands folded on the polished table. Jessica and Michael, he began, I want to understand how this started. Walk me through your thinking process. The twins exchanged one of their communicative looks, and Sarah could practically see them deciding on a strategy. Mr. Thorne, Jessica began, we want you to know that we never intended to hurt you personally. But you did hurt me personally, David interrupted. So your intentions are less important than your actions. I want to know how you justified those actions to yourselves. Michael leaned forward slightly. We saw that our mother was developing a drinking problem that was affecting her work performance. We were afraid she would lose her job, which would have had serious consequences for our family's financial stability. So you decided to blackmail me instead of encouraging your mother to get help? We tried talking to her, Jessica said. She wasn't listening. She kept saying everything was fine, that she was just stressed about the divorce. Sarah started to object, but David held up a hand. Let them finish. We researched the situation, Michael continued with the same matter-of-fact tone that had so disturbed Sarah the day before. We learned that alcoholism in the workplace is usually handled through termination rather than treatment, especially when it affects performance. We determined that the most effective way to protect our mother's employment was to ensure that you had incentives to continue protecting her. David stared at Michael for a long moment. You determined. You researched. Michael, you talk about extorting money from me like it was a school project. It required research and planning, Michael replied without apparent awareness of how chilling he sounded. Did it occur to you that what you were doing was illegal? Of course, Jessica answered. But we weighed the risks against the potential consequences of inaction. And you decided that committing felonies was preferable to having an honest conversation with your mother about getting help? Honest conversations weren't working, Jessica said with a slight edge to her voice. Our mother was in denial about the extent of her problem. David turned to Sarah. Is that true? Were they trying to talk to you about your drinking? Sarah thought back over the previous months, trying to remember any conversations with her children about alcohol. I don't remember them expressing specific concerns. There might have been comments about me seeming tired or stressed, but nothing direct. Because you weren't listening, Michael said. When we tried to bring up anything about your behavior, you deflect or change the subject. So you decided to photograph me without my knowledge and use those photos to extort money from my boss, Sarah said. That was your solution to my not listening? It was the most effective solution, Jessica replied with no apparent shame. David leaned back in his chair, studying the twins with something approaching fascination. Jessica, Michael, I need you to understand something. For 3 months, I have been living in a state of constant anxiety. I couldn't sleep properly. I snapped at my wife and children over nothing. I questioned every decision I made at work, wondering if I was compromising my integrity by protecting your mother or if I was being manipulated into enabling her drinking. We never intended, Michael started. You never intended to consider the human cost of your actions, David interrupted. You saw me as a chess piece to be moved around your board, not as a person with feelings, a family, a conscience. For the first time since entering the conference room, Jessica looked genuinely uncomfortable. Mr. Thorne, we're sorry if you were stressed. But you have to understand our position. Our mother was going to lose her job. Maybe she should have, David said quietly. Maybe facing the consequences of her drinking problem would have motivated her to get help sooner. Maybe protecting her from those consequences, even under duress, enabled her to continue drinking longer than she otherwise would have. Sarah felt the truth of that statement like a physical blow. He's right, she said softly. David, if you had fired me 3 months ago, I would have been forced to confront my drinking immediately. Instead, your protection allowed me to continue believing I was managing the problem. We were helping. Michael protested. You were helping yourselves, David corrected. You were ensuring that your comfortable lifestyle continued, regardless of the cost to anyone else. What about Aunt Rachel? Jessica asked desperately. If Mom had been fired for drinking, if it had become public, it would have affected Aunt Rachel's reputation at the bank. David studied Jessica carefully. Tell me about your Aunt Rachel. What exactly is her position at the bank? She's a loan officer, Sarah answered. She's worked there for 12 years, has an excellent reputation. Any scandal involving alcoholism in the family could potentially affect her standing with clients. Could potentially, David repeated. Or definitely would. The twins exchanged another look, this one less confident. We thought it might, Michael admitted. You threatened to destroy a woman's career based on something you thought might happen? David's voice was incredulous. Do you understand that loan officers are evaluated on their professional performance, not their relatives' personal problems? Do you understand that you used my concern for an innocent woman to manipulate me into paying you money? Jessica's facade was beginning to crack. We were trying to protect our family. You were trying to protect your financial security, David corrected. And you were willing to commit crimes and destroy lives to do it. He opened a folder he'd brought and pulled out bank statements. I've documented every payment you extorted from me. $2,000 over 3 months. Money that came out of my family's budget, that meant fewer opportunities for my own children, that caused financial stress in my household. Sarah looked at the statements, seeing her children's crimes laid out in black and white. David, I'll pay you back every penny. With interest. This isn't about the money, Sarah. This is about the fact that your 17-year-old children are capable of this level of manipulation and feel no genuine remorse for their actions. We do feel bad about the stress we caused you, Jessica said, but her tone was more sullen than apologetic. Do you? David leaned forward. Jessica, if I told you right now that I was going to press charges against both of you for extortion, what would your reaction be? Jessica's mask slipped completely. You can't do that. It would ruin our futures. We're supposed to start college next year. Criminal records would destroy our scholarship opportunities, our career prospects, everything we've worked for. Ah, David said quietly. There it is. You're not sorry for what you did to me. You're sorry that there might be consequences for you. That's not true, Michael protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? Michael, Jessica, in all of your planning, in all of your research, did you ever consider the psychological impact on me? Did you ever think about my family, my sleep, my peace of mind? The twins were silent. Or did you only consider how to manipulate me most effectively to get what you wanted? More silence. Sarah felt sick watching her children, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time. David, what do you want to do? David was quiet for a long moment, studying the twins. Sarah, I want you to get help for your drinking. Real help. Professional treatment. I will. I've already started looking into programs. And I want Jessica and Michael to understand the full weight of what they've done. I want them to write letters, not emails, handwritten letters, to my wife and children, apologizing for the stress they caused our family. I want them to perform community service related to victims of financial crimes. And I want them to undergo counseling to address whatever allowed them to think this behavior was acceptable. And if we do all of that? Jessica asked hopefully. Then I won't press charges, David said. But understand something, this is a one-time offer. If either of you ever engages in any similar behavior, if you ever try to manipulate or extort anyone again, I will make sure the authorities know about this incident. You'll have a very short leash for the rest of your lives. Sarah looked at her children, who were clearly calculating whether this was an acceptable deal. There's one more thing, David added. Sarah, I think you should tell your sister Rachel what happened. All of it. What? Jessica's voice was sharp with panic. Why? Because she was used as leverage in your scheme. She has a right to know that her reputation was weaponized by her own niece and nephew. And because secrets have already caused enough damage in this family. Sarah nodded slowly. You're right. Rachel deserves to know. Mom, you can't, Michael pleaded. Aunt Rachel will never forgive us. Maybe she will, maybe she won't, Sarah replied. But that's a consequence of your choices, not a reason to continue lying. David stood up. I'll give you a week to decide if you want to accept my terms. If you do, I want to see evidence that you've all started the work I've outlined. If not, I'll be filing a police report next Monday. As they rode the elevator down, Jessica finally broke the silence. We could fight this. We could claim he was coercing us, that he was the one taking advantage of the situation. Sarah stopped the elevator between floors and turned to face her daughter. Jessica, if you say one more word about manipulating this situation, I will march you to the police station myself. Do you understand me? For the first time since this nightmare began, Jessica looked genuinely frightened. Do you understand me? Sarah repeated. Yes, Jessica whispered. Sarah restarted the elevator. Good. Because tomorrow, we're all starting the hard work of becoming people we can respect again. The drive home was silent, each member of the Martinez family lost in their own thoughts. As they pulled into their driveway, Sarah noticed Mrs. Henderson from next door tending to her garden, and she wondered what their elderly neighbor would think if she knew the truth about the teenagers she'd always praised as such wonderful, responsible children. Inside the house, Sarah sat her children down at the kitchen table one more time. I want to understand something, she began. When you were spending David's money you extorted from him, what did that feel like? Jessica and Michael exchanged another look, but this time their silent communication seemed less confident. It felt. Jessica started, then stopped. It felt like what? Sarah pressed. It felt like we were finally in control, Michael admitted quietly. Like we were solving problems instead of just watching everything fall apart. Everything was falling apart? Sarah asked. What do you mean? Mom, Jessica's voice was softer now, less calculating. You've been a mess since the divorce. You were drinking more, working late, crying when you thought we couldn't hear you. You kept saying everything was fine, but it wasn't fine. Nothing was fine. Sarah felt a pang of guilt. She had tried so hard to shield her children from her struggles, but apparently she hadn't been as successful as she'd thought. So you decided to take control of the situation, Sarah said. Someone had to, Michael replied. You weren't handling it. By handling it, you mean I wasn't managing my problems in a way that ensured your comfort and security. We were scared, Jessica admitted, and for the first time, she sounded like a 17-year-old instead of a calculating adult. We were scared you'd lose your job, that we'd have to move, that we wouldn't be able to go to college, that everything would change. Sarah studied her daughter's face, seeing genuine fear underneath the manipulative exterior. So you committed serious crimes to maintain the status quo. We protected our family, Michael insisted, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. No, Sarah said firmly. You protected your plans. You protected your college funds and your designer clothes and your comfortable lifestyle. That's not the same as protecting family. Isn't it? Jessica asked. If you'd lost your job, then we would have figured it out together. As a family. Maybe I would have had to take a lower-paying position while I got treatment. Maybe you would have had to attend less expensive colleges or take out student loans. Maybe we would have had to make real sacrifices and real changes. But we would have done it honestly. Sarah paused, letting her words sink in. Instead, you chose to sacrifice an innocent man's peace of mind, to commit felonies, to manipulate and threaten and extort. You chose to become people I don't recognize. We're still your children, Michael said quietly. Are you? Sarah asked. Because the children I raised would never have done what you did. The children I raised understood right from wrong. The children I raised cared about other people's feelings. Tears were forming in Jessica's eyes. Mom, we're sorry. We really are sorry. Are you sorry for what you did, or are you sorry that you got caught? The question hung in the air unanswered. That evening, Sarah called her sister Rachel and asked her to come over. It was time for the conversation she'd been dreading. Rachel arrived within an hour, her concern evident on her face. At 39, Rachel was 5 years younger than Sarah but had always been the more stable, more responsible sister. She worked as a senior loan officer at First National Bank, owned her own home, had never been married but seemed content with her independent life. Sarah, you sounded terrible on the phone, Rachel said as she settled onto the living room couch. What's going on? Sarah had rehearsed this conversation in her head dozens of times, but now that the moment had arrived, she didn't know where to start. Rachel, I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me get through the whole story before you react. Rachel's expression grew more concerned. Okay. I'm listening. Sarah told her everything. The drinking, the workplace problems, David's changed behavior, the discovery of the blackmail emails, the threats made using Rachel's reputation. She left out nothing, sparing neither herself nor her children. When she finished, Rachel sat in stunned silence for several minutes. Let me make sure I understand this, Rachel finally said, her voice carefully controlled. Your children photographed you drinking at work, used those photos to blackmail your boss, and threatened to destroy my career if he didn't pay them money. Yes. And this went on for 3 months. Yes. And you had no idea. None. I thought David was planning to fire me. I was drinking more because of the stress, which made everything worse. Rachel stood up and walked to the window, her back to Sarah. Sarah, do you understand what this could have done to me? If those photos had been sent to my supervisor, if rumors about alcoholism in my family had started circulating among my clients? I know. I'm so sorry, Rachel. I'm so sorry that they used you, that they put you at risk. It's not just about the risk to my career, Rachel turned around, and Sarah saw tears in her sister's eyes. It's about the fact that your children I've loved and supported and been proud of, were willing to destroy me to get what they wanted. I know. Do they understand that? Do Jessica and Michael understand that they weren't just threatening to hurt you, they were threatening to hurt me? They claim they were protecting the family. By throwing me under the bus? Rachel's voice was rising. Sarah, they were willing to sacrifice my reputation, my career, my financial security, to protect their college funds. How is that protecting family? Sarah had no answer for that. Where are they now? Rachel asked. Upstairs in their rooms. They know you're here. They know I'm telling you everything. I want to talk to them. Rachel, are you sure? You're angry right now, Anne. I'm furious, Rachel interrupted. But I want to look them in the eye and understand how the children I helped raise became capable of this. Sarah called the twins downstairs. They appeared reluctantly, their faces pale with apprehension. Aunt Rachel, Jessica began, we can explain. Sit down, Rachel said sharply. Both of you. The twins sat on the edge of the couch, looking smaller and younger than they had in months. Jessica. Michael. I want you to look at me and tell me why you thought it was acceptable to threaten my career to solve your family's problems. The twins were silent. I'm waiting. We didn't think it would really affect you, Michael finally said. We thought Mr. Thorne would just pay us and everything would stay private. But you were prepared to follow through on the threat if he didn't pay? More silence. Were you prepared to destroy my career if David had refused to give you money? We wouldn't have actually done it, Jessica said quietly. You wrote the email. You made the threat. How was David supposed to know you were bluffing? We needed leverage. Rachel stared at her niece and nephew for a long moment. You needed leverage. To commit a felony. Against your mother's boss. Using my life as collateral. We're sorry, Aunt Rachel, Michael said, and for the first time, he sounded genuinely remorseful. Are you? Are you really? Or are you sorry that you got caught? It was the same question Sarah had asked, and the twins had no better answer for their aunt. I need some time, Rachel said, standing up. I need to think about this, about what it means, about how I feel about having my life used as a weapon by people I trusted. Rachel, please, Jessica stood up too. We love you. We would never have actually hurt you. You already did hurt me, Rachel replied. You made me a pawn in your scheme. You reduced my life, my career, my reputation to a bargaining chip. The fact that you might not have followed through doesn't change the fact that you were willing to threaten it. As Rachel gathered her purse to leave, she turned back to Sarah. I love you, and I love them. But I need time to process this. I need to figure out how to move forward with all of you. After Rachel left, the house felt suffocatingly quiet. The twins had returned to their rooms without being asked, and Sarah sat alone in her living room, contemplating the wreckage of relationships that had taken years to build and days to destroy. Monday morning, Sarah called in sick to work and instead drove to Pine Grove Treatment Center, a facility that specialized in outpatient alcohol rehabilitation. She'd spent the weekend researching programs, reading testimonials, and finally admitting to herself that she couldn't handle this problem alone. Dr. Patricia Mills, the intake counselor, was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She listened to Sarah's story without judgment, taking notes and asking clarifying questions. Sarah, what you're describing, drinking during work hours, using alcohol to manage stress, continuing to drink despite negative consequences, these are clear indicators of alcohol use disorder, Dr. Mills explained. The good news is that you're seeking help before you've lost everything. Many people don't reach out until they've lost their jobs, their families, their health. I almost did lose my job, Sarah admitted. If my children hadn't. She stopped, not sure how to explain the blackmail situation. Your children hadn't what? Sarah told Dr. Mills about the blackmail scheme, watching the counselor's expression shift from surprise to concern. Sarah, that's a very serious situation. Have you considered that your children might benefit from counseling as well? It's part of the agreement we made with my boss. They have to get counseling. Good. What they did suggests some significant issues with empathy and moral reasoning that need to be addressed. Dr. Mills outlined a treatment plan that included individual therapy, group sessions, and education about alcohol and its effects. The program would require Sarah to attend sessions 3 times a week for the first month, then gradually reduce the frequency as she progressed. I'll need to inform my employer, Sarah said. I can't keep hiding this. That's often one of the most difficult steps, Dr. Mills agreed. But it's usually less catastrophic than people fear. Many employers have employee assistance programs specifically designed to help workers who are struggling with addiction. That afternoon, Sarah met with David in his office. She'd expected the conversation to be awkward, but David's response surprised her. Sarah, I'm proud of you for getting help, he said sincerely. I know this couldn't have been easy. I should have done it months ago. Before any of this happened. Maybe. But you're doing it now, and that's what matters. David explained that Stratton Marketing did indeed have an employee assistance program that included coverage for addiction treatment. He would work with HR to ensure that Sarah could take the time she needed for her recovery without jeopardizing her position. What about the twins? David asked. Have they started counseling? I'm taking them for intake appointments this week. David, I want you to know that if you change your mind about pressing charges, I'll understand completely. David was quiet for a moment. Sarah, I've been thinking about that. Part of me wants to see them face legal consequences. What they did was serious, and they don't seem to fully grasp the gravity of their actions. But I also think about my own teenagers. If they made a terrible mistake, I'd want them to have a chance to make it right before their lives were permanently damaged. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. You're being more generous than they deserve. Maybe. But I'm hoping that counseling and community service will be more educational than a juvenile detention center. Meanwhile, Jessica and Michael were struggling with their own reckonings. Their carefully constructed world of privilege and control had crumbled, and they were discovering that their usual strategies for managing problems weren't working. I still don't understand why everyone is acting like we're criminals, Jessica complained to Michael as they sat in her room Monday evening. We were trying to help. Maybe we should have handled it differently, Michael said quietly. Jessica stared at her brother. Are you seriously buying into their guilt trip? Michael, we saved Mom's job. We protected our family's financial security. We solved a problem that Mom was too drunk to handle herself. By blackmailing someone. By creating incentives for positive outcomes. Michael looked at his sister, really looked at her, and saw something that disturbed him. Jess, do you hear yourself? You're talking about extorting money from Mom's boss like it was a business transaction. It was strategic problem solving. It was a felony. Only if you get caught. Michael felt a chill run down his spine. His twin sister, his closest confidant, his partner in everything, was completely unremorseful about what they'd done. More than that, she seemed to genuinely believe they'd been in the right. Jess, what if it had been us? What if someone had blackmailed Dad when he and Mom were getting divorced? What if someone had threatened to expose our family's problems unless we paid the money? That's different, Jessica said immediately. We're not criminals. We were protecting our family. The people blackmailing Dad would probably say the same thing. Jessica turned to study her brother's face. Michael, you're not seriously having second thoughts about this, are you? Because if you start confessing and apologizing, if you start buying into their narrative that we're the bad guys, it's going to make everything worse for both of us. Maybe we are the bad guys, Jess. No, Jessica said firmly. We're the ones who took action when everyone else was paralyzed. We're the ones who solved the problem. If people want to call that criminal, that's their problem. Michael felt a gulf opening between him and his sister, a distance he'd never experienced before. For the first time in their lives, they were seeing a situation completely differently. Dr. Amanda Foster specialized in adolescent behavioral issues, and she'd seen many teenagers who'd made poor choices. But as she listened to Jessica and Michael Martinez explain their actions during their first joint session, she found herself both fascinated and concerned. "Help me understand your thinking process," Dr. Foster said to Jessica, who had just finished explaining the blackmail scheme with the same matter-of-fact tone she might use to describe a school project. "When you decided to photograph your mother drinking, what was your goal?" "Documentation," Jessica replied immediately. "We needed evidence of the problem to create leverage for solving it." "And when you contacted Mr. Thorne?" "We presented him with a solution that benefited everyone involved." Dr. Foster made notes. "Jessica, do you believe that Mr. Thorne benefited from your solution?" "Of course. We removed the burden of having to make a difficult decision about Mom's employment. We gave him a way to protect her without compromising his own position. By paying you money. By investing in our family's stability." Dr. Foster turned to Michael. "Do you agree with your sister's assessment?" Michael hesitated. I used to. But seeing how stressed Mr. Thorne was yesterday, seeing how hurt Aunt Rachel was, I'm starting to think maybe we didn't consider all the consequences." Jessica shot her brother a sharp look. "Michael, don't let them manipulate you into feeling guilty about solving problems." "Them?" Dr. Foster asked. "Who is them?" "The adults who are trying to make us feel bad for being effective when they were ineffective." Dr. Foster studied Jessica carefully. "Jessica, I'd like to try an exercise. I want you to imagine that you're Mr. Thorne. You're a successful professional, a father, a husband. One day you receive an email from strangers who have photographs of one of your employees drinking at work. They tell you they'll keep this secret if you pay them money regularly. How do you think you would feel?" "I would appreciate having options," Jessica replied without hesitation. "You wouldn't feel threatened? Manipulated? Violated?" "I would feel like someone had presented me with a business proposition." Dr. Foster looked at Michael. "What about you? How do you think you would feel in Mr. Thorne's position?" Michael was quiet for a long moment. I think I would feel scared. And angry. And like I was trapped." "Why would you feel trapped?" "Because no matter what I chose to do, someone would get hurt. If I paid the money, I'd be letting blackmailers control me. If I didn't pay, I'd be responsible for Mom losing her job and Aunt Rachel getting hurt." "That's exactly right," Dr. Foster said. "Michael, you've identified why blackmail is so psychologically damaging. It puts people in impossible positions where they can't make good choices." Jessica looked annoyed. "Mr. Thorne could have made good choices. He could have helped Mom get treatment instead of just protecting her job. He could have addressed the real problem instead of just managing symptoms. And you think threatening to destroy an innocent woman's career was an appropriate way to encourage him to make those choices?" "We think it was effective motivation." Dr. Foster made more notes. This was going to be a long process. In her individual session later that week, Dr. Foster explored Jessica's lack of empathy more deeply. "Jessica, when you were spending the money you received from Mr. Thorne, did you ever think about where it came from?" "We thought about it strategically. We were careful not to ask for amounts that would create financial hardship for him." "But did you think about it emotionally? Did you consider that he might have been planning to use that money for something important to his family?" Jessica looked genuinely puzzled. "Why would we consider that? His financial planning wasn't our responsibility. But his financial stress was something you created. His financial stress was a byproduct of the solution we implemented. All solutions have costs." Dr. Foster leaned forward. "Jessica, I want you to try something for me. I want you to close your eyes and imagine Mr. Thorne at home with his wife and children. Imagine him explaining to his wife that they can't afford something they'd been planning because he has to pay money to strangers who are threatening to expose a workplace situation. Jessica closed her eyes obediently, but when she opened them, her expression hadn't changed. What did you feel when you imagined that scenario? Nothing, really. I mean, I understand intellectually that it would be an unpleasant conversation for him to have, but it was a necessary cost of resolving the larger problem. Dr. Foster realized she was dealing with something more serious than typical teenage poor judgment. Jessica's inability to emotionally connect with the impact of her actions on others suggested deeper issues that would require intensive work. Michael's individual sessions revealed a different story. Unlike his sister, Michael was beginning to understand the emotional weight of their actions. I keep thinking about Mr. Thorne's face yesterday, Michael told Dr. Foster. He looked so tired, so stressed. And I realized that we did that to him. For 3 months, we made his life miserable. How does that realization feel? Terrible. I feel sick about it. But Dr. Foster, I don't know how to talk to Jessica about this. She thinks I'm being weak, that I'm letting everyone manipulate me into feeling bad about being effective. What do you think about Jessica's perspective? Michael was quiet for a long time. I think she's wrong. I think we hurt people, and I think being effective at hurting people isn't something to be proud of. That's a significant insight, Michael. What do you think led to the difference in how you and Jessica are processing this situation? I don't know. We've always thought alike about everything. But this feels different. When I see how much pain we caused, I feel awful. When Jessica sees it, she just analyzes whether our strategy was optimal. Dr. Foster made notes about the diverging paths the twins seemed to be taking. Jessica appeared to have significant empathy deficits that would require long-term intervention. Michael, on the other hand, seemed capable of genuine remorse and growth. 2 weeks into their counseling, Jessica and Michael began their court-ordered community service at the Financial Crimes Victim Support Center. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that they would be helping people who had been victimized by exactly the kind of crimes they had committed. Their supervisor was Patricia Hernandez, a former fraud investigator who now worked with victims of financial crimes. She'd been briefed on the twins' situation and had specific plans for their education. Your first assignment, Patricia told them on their first day, is to listen to victim impact statements from people who have been blackmailed, extorted, or otherwise financially manipulated. I want you to hear their stories and write reports on what you learn. The first victim they met was Eleanor Thompson, a 72-year-old woman who had been scammed by her own grandson. Eleanor's story was heartbreaking. A young man she'd trusted had convinced her to give him money for various emergencies, all of which turned out to be lies. The worst part, Eleanor told them, wasn't losing the money. It was losing my faith in family, in trust, in my own judgment. My grandson made me feel like I couldn't trust anyone, not even myself. Jessica listened to Eleanor's story with polite attention, taking notes and asking appropriate questions. But Michael could see that his sister was analyzing Eleanor's story for weaknesses rather than connecting with her pain. After Eleanor left, Patricia asked the twins for their immediate reactions. She was very articulate about her experience, Jessica said. I can see how the emotional manipulation would be more damaging than the financial loss. Michael? Patricia prompted. I felt sick, Michael admitted. Listening to her talk about how her grandson betrayed her trust, it made me think about what we did to Mr. Thorne. We made him feel like he couldn't trust his own judgment about right and wrong. Patricia nodded approvingly. Michael, that's exactly the kind of insight I was hoping you'd develop. Jessica, I want you to think more deeply about Eleanor's emotional experience. It's not enough to understand it intellectually, you need to connect with it emotionally. Over the following weeks, they met with more victims. A small business owner who had been extorted by employees. A teacher who had been blackmailed by a student's parent. a father who had paid money to protect his son from false accusations. Each story chipped away at Michael's defenses, helping him understand the full scope of what he and Jessica had done to David. But Jessica remained largely unmoved, continuing to analyze each situation strategically rather than emotionally. "I don't understand what you want from me," Jessica told Patricia after their third week. "I understand that these people were hurt by financial crimes. I understand that what Michael and I did was technically illegal. But I don't understand why everyone expects me to have some kind of emotional breakdown about solving a problem effectively." "Because," Patricia replied patiently, "solving problems effectively isn't worth much if you destroy people in the process." "But we didn't destroy anyone. Mr. Thorne is fine. Mom still has her job. Aunt Rachel's career wasn't affected. Everyone is fine. Mr. Thorne spent 3 months in psychological distress because of your actions. Your mother's drinking problem was enabled rather than addressed. Your aunt feels betrayed by people she trusted. How is that fine? Those are temporary emotional reactions to necessary changes. The long-term outcomes are positive." Patricia stared at Jessica, recognizing something she'd seen in other young offenders, a complete inability to process the emotional weight of her actions. This wasn't typical teenage selfishness or poor judgment. This was something more concerning. Meanwhile, Sarah's own recovery was progressing. The outpatient program was helping her understand the roots of her drinking problem and develop healthier coping strategies. She was learning to manage stress without alcohol, to communicate more honestly with her family, and to take responsibility for her choices without drowning in guilt. In one of her group sessions, she shared the story of discovering her children's blackmail scheme. "I keep wondering if I failed them somehow," Sarah told the group. "If my drinking, my problems after the divorce, somehow taught them that manipulation was acceptable." "Sarah," said Dr. Mills, who often facilitated the group sessions, "addiction affects the whole family, but it doesn't create sociopaths. Your drinking problem didn't cause your children to become blackmailers any more than their blackmail caused your drinking problem. These are separate issues that need to be addressed separately. But I feel responsible. I feel like I created the circumstances that led to their behavior." Another group member, Robert, spoke up. "Sarah, I've been thinking about your situation since you first shared it. My son got into drugs when he was 17. For years, I blamed myself, thinking that my work stress and my own drinking had somehow caused his addiction. But eventually I realized that my problems didn't excuse his choices. He was responsible for his decisions, just like you're responsible for yours, and your kids are responsible for theirs." Sarah nodded, feeling some of the guilt she'd been carrying begin to lift. "The thing is," Robert continued, "your daughter especially, the way you describe her thinking about the blackmail, that's not normal teenage behavior. That's something else. And whatever it is, it existed before your drinking problem and it would have existed even if you'd never touched alcohol." Dr. Mills agreed. "Sarah, from what you've described about Jessica's responses in counseling, she's showing signs of significant empathy deficits. That's not something that develops because a parent has a drinking problem. That's usually present from early childhood, though it might not manifest in criminal behavior until adolescence." "Are you saying she's a sociopath?" "I'm saying she needs intensive intervention from specialists who work with empathy disorders. This isn't something that standard family counseling is going to resolve." 1 month into their community service, the differences between Jessica and Michael had become impossible to ignore. Michael was genuinely engaging with the victims' stories, developing real remorse for his actions, and working to make amends. Jessica was going through the motions, saying the right words, but showing no genuine emotional growth. The breaking point came during their session with David Kellerman, a financial advisor who had been blackmailed by a client's teenage son. The teenager had threatened to accuse David of inappropriate behavior unless David helped him embezzle money from his trust fund. "I paid him at first," David told the twins. "I was so scared of the false accusations that I didn't think clearly about what I was doing. But the demands kept escalating, and I realized that giving in to blackmail never ends, it just gets worse. Michael was visibly affected by David's story. What happened when you finally refused to pay? He followed through on his threat. He made the false accusations. I was investigated, cleared of all wrongdoing, but my reputation was damaged. Some clients left. My family was put through hell. But you know what? I'm glad I finally stood up to him, because that's when the truth came out about his criminal behavior. After David left, Patricia asked the twins to discuss what they'd learned from his story. Michael spoke first, his voice heavy with emotion. He's right about blackmail never ending. We probably would have kept asking Mr. Thorne for money indefinitely. And when I think about what we put him through. He trailed off, unable to finish. Jessica's response was characteristically clinical. Mr. Kellerman's situation was different from ours. He was dealing with false accusations, which are inherently unstable leverage. Our documentation was factual, which made our position much stronger. Patricia stared at Jessica in disbelief. Jessica, did you hear what he said about his family being put through hell? About his reputation being damaged? About the psychological torture of being blackmailed? I heard it. But his situation proves my point. If you're going to use leverage, you need to ensure it's legitimate and sustainable. False accusations are poor strategy because they can be disproven. Michael turned to look at his sister with horror. Jess, you're talking about improving blackmail techniques. You're not learning that blackmail is wrong, you're learning how to do it better. I'm learning from case studies, Jessica replied matter-of-factly. All experiences provide data for future decision-making. That evening, Patricia called Sarah to request an emergency meeting. When Sarah arrived at the counseling center, Patricia's expression was grave. Sarah, I need to be direct with you. Jessica is not responding to intervention. In fact, I'm concerned that she's using these sessions to refine her understanding of manipulation rather than developing empathy or remorse. Sarah felt her stomach drop. What are you saying? I'm saying that Jessica may have a personality disorder that requires specialized treatment. Her complete inability to connect with victims' experiences, her continued justification of criminal behavior, her focus on improving rather than abandoning harmful strategies, these are red flags for antisocial personality disorder. But she's only 17. Isn't she too young for that diagnosis? Antisocial personality disorder isn't typically diagnosed until age 18, but we can see precursors in adolescence. Jessica is showing classic signs: lack of empathy, manipulative behavior, criminal activity without remorse, and a grandiose sense of her own superiority. Sarah felt tears forming. What does this mean for her future? It means she needs intensive intervention from specialists who work with personality disorders. And Sarah, you need to understand that this condition doesn't typically improve with standard therapy. Jessica may never develop the capacity for genuine empathy or remorse. What about Michael? Michael is showing real progress. He's developing genuine empathy, taking responsibility for his actions, and working to make amends. The twins may have committed the same crimes, but they're psychologically very different people. Sarah drove home feeling devastated. How had she raised two children who could commit the same crimes but be so fundamentally different in their capacity for growth and change? When she arrived home, she found Michael waiting for her in the kitchen, his face pale with anxiety. Mom, I need to tell you something. About Jessica. Sarah sat down across from her son. What about her? She's been planning things. She's not done with Mr. Thorne. What do you mean? She's been researching him online. Learning about his family, his finances, his social media posts. She says she's just curious, but Mom, I know Jessica. She's building another file. Sarah felt ice in her veins. Michael, what exactly has she been doing? She knows where his kids go to school. She knows what activities they're involved in. She knows his wife's schedule, his mortgage payment, his vacation plans. She's been collecting information like she did before. For what purpose? She says it's just good strategy to understand people you've had business relationships with. But Mom, she's also been talking about how our arrangement with Mr. Thorne could be reactivated if our family ever needed financial assistance again. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the full weight of what her daughter had become. Does she know you're telling me this? No. And Mom, I'm scared to confront her about it. She's been different with me lately. Colder. She says I've been compromised by the therapy and that I'm becoming a liability. A liability to what? To future family security operations. That's what she calls them, operations. Sarah looked at her son, seeing the fear in his eyes. Michael, do you think Jessica would hurt you if she knew you were telling me this? I don't know. Maybe not physically, but... Mom, she's already started spreading rumors at school about kids who've been critical of us. She's been manipulating social situations to isolate people she sees as threats. It's like she's practicing. That night, Sarah called David Thorne at home, despite the late hour. David, I'm so sorry to bother you, but I have reason to believe that Jessica hasn't given up on targeting your family. The silence on the other end of the phone was terrifying. What kind of targeting? David's voice was carefully controlled. Sarah told him what Michael had shared, watching David's worst fears come to life. Sarah, this changes everything. If Jessica is continuing to surveil my family, if she's making plans for future extortion, I can't honor our agreement anymore. I have to protect my wife and children. I understand completely. David, what do you need me to do? I think it's time to involve law enforcement. Not just about the original blackmail, but about Jessica's current behavior. What you're describing sounds like stalking and planning future crimes. Chapter 11, The Final Reckoning. The next morning, Sarah made the most difficult decision of her life. She called the police herself. Detective Maria Santos arrived at the Martinez house within an hour, accompanied by a juvenile investigator. Sarah had prepared copies of all the emails, bank records, and photographs that documented the blackmail scheme. She also shared Michael's information about Jessica's ongoing surveillance of the Thorne family. Mrs. Martinez, Detective Santos said after reviewing the evidence, I want you to understand that what we're dealing with here goes beyond typical juvenile crime. The level of planning, the psychological manipulation, the lack of remorse, and now the continued targeting, this suggests we're dealing with a young person who poses a genuine threat to public safety. What happens now? We'll be arresting Jessica this morning. Given the seriousness of the charges and the evidence of continued criminal planning, the district attorney will likely try her as an adult. Sarah felt her world collapse. As an adult? She's 17. Mrs. Martinez, the crimes she committed weren't typical teenage mistakes. They were sophisticated felonies that caused significant harm to multiple victims. And the fact that she's continuing to plan similar crimes shows that she's not amenable to rehabilitation through the juvenile system. When the police arrested Jessica, her reaction confirmed everyone's worst fears about her psychological state. She didn't cry, didn't protest her innocence, didn't beg for mercy. Instead, she calmly asked if she could speak to a lawyer and informed the officers that she understood her rights. This is a setback, she told Sarah as they put her in handcuffs. But it's not insurmountable. I'll adapt my strategies for the new circumstances. Even facing arrest for felony charges, Jessica was thinking strategically about her next moves. Michael, on the other hand, was devastated. He cooperated fully with the investigation, providing additional details about their planning and Jessica's recent activities. His genuine remorse and willingness to take responsibility influenced the prosecutor's decision to offer him a plea deal that would allow him to avoid adult charges in exchange for continued therapy and community service. At Jessica's arraignment, she was charged with multiple felonies, extortion, blackmail, cyberstalking, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The judge, after reviewing the evidence and psychological evaluations, ordered her to be held in juvenile detention pending trial. During her detention, Jessica was evaluated by Dr. Richard Hartwell, a forensic psychologist who specialized in adolescent offenders. His report was chilling. Jessica Martinez presents with classic symptoms of antisocial personality disorder, including superficial charm, manipulative behavior, lack of empathy, grandiose self-regard, and a complete absence of remorse for her criminal actions. Most concerning is her continued planning of criminal activities even after arrest, suggesting that she views legal consequences as obstacles to overcome rather than deterrents to criminal behavior. In my professional opinion, Jessica poses a significant threat to public safety and is unlikely to benefit from traditional rehabilitation programs. Her psychological profile suggests that she will continue to engage in criminal behavior unless she faces severe consequences that limit her ability to victimize others. The trial became a local sensation. The image of an honor roll student, debate team champion, and college-bound teenager being tried as an adult for blackmail captured media attention and sparked debates about juvenile justice. During the trial, the prosecution painted a picture of Jessica as a calculating predator who had targeted a vulnerable victim for financial gain. They presented evidence of her continued surveillance of the Thorne family, her lack of remorse, and her plans for future criminal activity. The defense argued that Jessica was a misguided teenager who had made poor decisions while trying to help her family. They emphasized her academic achievements, her young age, and the stress of her parents' divorce. But the prosecution's case was devastating. They called David Thorne to testify about the psychological impact of months of blackmail. They presented evidence of Jessica's continued planning of criminal activities. Most damaging of all, they played recordings of Jessica's conversations with her court-appointed therapist, in which she discussed how she would optimize her approach for future family security operations. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. At sentencing, Jessica finally showed emotion, not remorse, but anger at the inefficiency of the justice system and frustration that her strategic thinking wasn't appreciated. Judge Catherine Morrison sentenced Jessica to 8 years in adult prison, with the possibility of parole after 5 years contingent on successful completion of intensive psychological treatment. Miss Martinez, Judge Morrison said, "Your crimes were not the result of poor judgment or teenage impulsivity. They were the product of a sophisticated criminal mind that shows no signs of reform or rehabilitation. This sentence reflects not just the seriousness of your past crimes, but the danger you pose to future victims if left unchecked." Michael received 2 years of probation, 500 hours of community service, and mandatory therapy. His genuine remorse and cooperation with authorities influenced the court's decision to give him a chance at rehabilitation. Chapter 12, Aftermath and Healing. 2 years later, Sarah sat in Dr. Foster's office for what would be her final therapy session. Her recovery from alcohol abuse had been successful. She'd been sober for over 2 years and had rebuilt her career and her relationship with her family. "How are you feeling about where things stand now?" Dr. Foster asked. "Grateful," Sarah said without hesitation. "Grateful that I got help from my drinking before it destroyed my life completely. Grateful that Michael was able to learn from his mistakes and grow into a person I can be proud of. And grateful that Jessica was stopped before she could victimize more people." "That's a very healthy perspective. How are things with Michael?" "He's doing well. He's a sophomore at the local university, studying social work. He says he wants to help kids who are struggling so they don't make the choices he made. His probation officer says he's one of the most successful rehabilitation cases she's ever seen." "And Jessica?" Sarah's expression grew sadder. "I visit her every month. She's still Jessica. Still calculating, still manipulative, still convinced that she was right and everyone else was wrong. The prison psychologist says she's made no progress toward developing empathy or remorse." "How does that feel for you as her mother?" "It feels like grief," Sarah admitted. "I'm grieving the daughter I thought I had, the daughter I wanted her to be. The Jessica I visit in prison isn't the child I raised, Or maybe she is, and I just never saw who she really was. Do you blame yourself? I used to. But I've learned that my drinking didn't create a sociopath. My divorce didn't cause Jessica to lack empathy. My stress didn't teach her to manipulate and hurt people. Those traits were always there, the blackmail scheme just revealed them. What about your relationship with David Thorne? Sarah smiled slightly. He's become a friend, actually. After the trial, he told me that he understood the difference between Jessica's choices and mine. We've had coffee a few times, and he's told me that seeing our family work through this situation has helped him process his own trauma from the blackmail. And Rachel? Rachel and I are closer than ever. She was hurt initially, but she came to understand that Jessica's willingness to use her as leverage wasn't something I could have predicted or prevented. She's been incredibly supportive during my recovery. Dr. Foster made her final notes. Sarah, you've done remarkable work over these past 2 years. You've taken responsibility for your choices, gotten help for your addiction, supported Michael's rehabilitation, and found a way to love Jessica while accepting her limitations. That takes incredible strength. I've learned that loving someone doesn't mean enabling them or making excuses for them. I love Jessica, but I can't pretend she's someone she's not. And I can't sacrifice other people's safety to protect her from the consequences of her choices. As Sarah left Dr. Foster's office for the last time, she reflected on how much her life had changed. Her drinking problem had nearly destroyed her career and her family. Her daughter's crimes had shattered her understanding of right and wrong. But somehow, through the wreckage of those disasters, she'd found a kind of peace. Michael was thriving in college and had become an advocate for juvenile justice reform. David Thorne had recovered from his trauma and had become a mentor to other crime victims. Even Rachel had found some positive meaning in the experience, volunteering with organizations that helped families affected by crime. Jessica remained in prison, still convinced that she had been the victim of an inefficient justice system that failed to appreciate strategic thinking. Her appeals had been unsuccessful, and her parole requests had been denied due to her continued lack of remorse. But Sarah had learned to live with that reality. She had learned to love her daughter while protecting herself and others from her daughter's choices. She had learned that taking responsibility for her own mistakes didn't mean taking responsibility for everyone else's. As she drove home from her final therapy session, Sarah thought about a conversation she'd had with Michael the week before. "Mom," he'd said, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd never been caught? If you'd never found those emails?" Every day, Sarah had admitted. "I think Jessica would have continued blackmailing David indefinitely. I think she would have eventually expanded to targeting other people. And I think I would have continued drinking until it killed me or destroyed everything I cared about." So in a weird way, getting caught saved us all? Getting caught forced us all to face the truth about ourselves. That's what saved us. Now, driving through the suburban streets where she'd raised her children, Sarah felt grateful for that forced confrontation with truth. It had been devastating and painful and had cost her daughter's freedom. But it had also given her back her life, her integrity, and her relationship with her son. The blackmail twins had been stopped. One had learned from his mistakes and chosen redemption. The other had revealed herself to be someone who needed to be separated from society for everyone's protection. And Sarah had learned that sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is refuse to protect their child from the consequences of their own choices. Sarah Martinez stood in the campus auditorium, watching her son Michael address a group of at-risk teenagers about the consequences of criminal behavior. At 22, he had completed his degree in social work and was now working with a non-profit organization that specialized in juvenile crime prevention. "I want you to understand," Michael was telling the audience, "that when I was 17, I thought I was smarter than everyone else. I thought I could solve problems that adults couldn't handle. I thought I could commit crimes without anyone getting hurt. I was wrong about all of those things." Sarah felt proud of the man her son had become. His genuine remorse had evolved into a passionate commitment to helping other young people avoid the mistakes he'd made. His probation had ended 3 years ago, but he continued to volunteer for victim services and speak to youth groups about the reality of criminal consequences. After the presentation, a teenage girl approached Michael with tears in her eyes. "My brother is planning something bad," she whispered. "Something like what you did. How do I stop him?" Sarah watched as Michael knelt down to the girl's level, his expression serious and compassionate. "You tell a trusted adult immediately," he said gently. "You don't try to handle it yourself, and you don't keep his secrets. Because the best thing you can do for someone you love is to stop them before they hurt others and destroy their own life." Sarah thought about Jessica, now serving her 6th year in prison. Her appeals had been exhausted, and her parole requests continued to be denied. The prison psychologists reported that she had made no progress toward rehabilitation and continued to view herself as a victim of an unjust system rather than as someone who had harmed others. Sarah still visited Jessica monthly, but their conversations remained superficial and unsatisfying. Jessica would update her on prison politics, discuss her plans for when she was eventually released, and occasionally ask for money for commissary items. She never asked about Michael's recovery, never expressed interest in making amends to David Thorne, never showed any awareness of the pain she had caused. "She's exactly the same person she was at 17, Sarah had told Dr. Foster during a follow-up session the previous year. Prison hasn't changed her fundamental nature, it's just given her a new environment to navigate strategically. "Some people don't change, Sarah," Dr. Foster had replied gently. "Some people can't change. The tragedy isn't that Jessica turned out to be someone different than you thought. The tragedy would have been if she'd never been stopped." Sarah often thought about that observation. How many people would Jessica have victimized if she'd never been caught? How many David Thornes would have suffered through months of psychological torture? How many families would have been manipulated and threatened? The blackmail scheme that had seemed like Sarah's worst nightmare had actually been a blessing in disguise. It had forced her to confront her drinking problem before it became fatal. It had revealed Michael's capacity for growth and redemption. And it had stopped Jessica before she could cause even more damage. David Thorne had also rebuilt his life. He'd received therapy for the trauma of being blackmailed and had become an advocate for victims of financial crimes. He and Sarah had maintained a friendship over the years, bonded by their shared experience of surviving Jessica's manipulation. The hardest part, David had told Sarah recently, wasn't the money or even the threats. It was the way she made me question my own moral compass. "For months, I wondered if I was a bad person for not reporting your drinking problem immediately. I wondered if I was weak for giving in to blackmail. I wondered if I was complicit in enabling both your addiction and her crimes." "You were trying to do the right thing in an impossible situation," Sarah had replied. Jessica was an expert at creating impossible situations. Now, watching Michael help troubled teenagers find better paths, Sarah felt grateful for the painful lessons her family had learned. The blackmail twin story had ended with one twin finding redemption and the other facing justice. It wasn't the ending Sarah had wanted, but it was the ending that reflected the reality of who her children truly were. As she drove home from Michael's presentation, Sarah's phone rang. It was the correctional facility where Jessica was housed. "Mrs. Martinez," the voice said, "your daughter has requested an additional phone call this week. She says she has something important to discuss with you." Sarah felt the familiar mixture of hope and dread that always accompanied news about Jessica. "Did she say what it was about?" "No, ma'am. Just that it was important family business." Sarah agreed to accept the call, though she suspected it would be another request for money or another complaint about prison conditions. Jessica had never used her phone calls for apologies or expressions of remorse. But as Sarah hung up the phone, she found herself hoping, despite years of disappointment, that maybe this time would be different. Maybe Jessica had finally developed some capacity for self-reflection or remorse. Maybe the daughter Sarah had lost to sociopathy could still be found. It was probably false hope, Sarah knew. But some hopes were worth maintaining, even when they were unlikely to be fulfilled. Jessica was still her daughter, and Sarah would continue to love her while protecting herself and others from her choices. The blackmail twin story was ending exactly as it should, with justice served, victims healed, and the possibility of redemption for those capable of change. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was a true one. And sometimes, Sarah had learned, truth was more valuable than happiness.